Слова. Так, уважаемые коллеги-преподаватели, уважаемые студенты, огромное удовольствие появиться за второй раз в течение только одного года. Спасибо за приглашение. Спасибо за то, что в прошлом году помогли мне преодолеть барьер в подготовке одной статьи. Знаете, летел и думал о том, как же подготовить, как же совершенствовать мою аргументацию в статьи о employability, возможности использования рабочей силы молодых людей. Не было идей, не было вдохновения как-то. А после моего выступления, после наших дискуссий, вот такие молодые, интеллигентные лица, вдохновение пришло, немножко там аргументацию расширил, углубил, и статья появилась в втором номере Международного журнала сравнительной социологии, так что спасибо. Спасибо и за то, что сорганизовали прекрасную погоду. У вас дружественные связи с всемогущим, так что работает все прекрасно. Так. Я переключу на английский язык, так как слайды у меня на английском языке. Но перебивайте, спрашивайте, если что-то не ясно, что-то надо объяснить подробнее на русском языке, я на расположении. Значит, международная миграция очень существенный феномен нашей современности. Вы видите результаты исследований Организации Объединенных Наций. Очень быстро повышается рост миграции из, условно говоря, с мирового юга к направлению мирового севера. Ну и повышается миграция из мирового юга к мировому югу, в Африке прежде очередь. Во всяком случае, в прошлом году мы пережили очень быстрое и драматическое повышение уровня международной миграции, cross-border migration, as we put it in English, and cross-border migration at the size of 235 million on their move from one country to another country. It's a very impressive number. Well, typical picture towards heading Lampedusa, symbolic pictures about the way in which people from Africa mostly move to the paradise called Western Europe, but this is also a typical way of moving through the guarded border between South America, Central America, towards the United States. You know the story about the tunnels which Mexicans, South Americans dig in order to go to the United States. Various types of migrants. I'll focus mostly on the long-term labor migrants because they make out 75, 80, even 85% of the migrants from region to region. Well, I was confronted with this topic in theoretical and empirical terms, first of all with a large-scale study which I organized from Berlin, from the Free University. It was very generously funded by Volkswagen Foundation. The study was on immigrants or migrants from Armenia and Georgia to Moscow. Well, most of them moved from Armenia and Georgia to Moscow because of economic needs. So not as free birds flying where they would like to but Volkswagen Foundation liked this picture, so it is the symbol of the project. So the partners, the Academy of Sciences of Armenia, the Center for Study of the Population Developments in Georgia, Tbilisi, and the Russian State Social University in Moscow. I'll tell you why actually this university. The fields of the study. We had to establish the profiles of potential migrants from Armenia, Georgia, profiles of migrants, immigrants in Moscow, the level of awareness of migrants, the population at large, and the experts. Please keep in mind, this last nice word, experts. It turned out that experts are not real experts, but I'll explain why. The situation was complicated. It was cross-boundary migration in times of crisis. I received the confirmation that my project proposal was confirmed at the end of June 2008. I received the funding at the end of July, and in the beginning of September, the first meeting of the team had to take place in Tbilisi. All fine. But there was in between a war in Georgia, South Ossetia, so the meeting had to be moved to Yerevan, and I had difficulties to establish even peace in the small research team, peace between the Russian part and Georgian part participating in the research. We had to study the legal environment, hopes, risks, and various economic, political, social, demographic concerns on the part of all participants. Because of these organizational troubles, I did not get enough time to concentrate on the theoretical part of the study. I used a very trivial, simplistic conceptual scheme, conditions in the country of origin, then motivation for out-migration, decision for out-migration, immigration was meant Moscow, and integration or lack of integration in the local society in Moscow. So, impact of out-migration in various directions, remittances, and so on, and very important, return migration from Moscow to the countries of origin, Armenia and Georgia. Once more, very simplified, but it worked as a basic orientation. I included some operationalizations on the basis of classical, to put it, theoretical ideas, the hierarchy of needs of Abraham Maslow. There's some ideas from the classical book by Peter M. Sorokin on social mobility. Well, in order to develop questionnaires, instructions for empirical studies, and to apply them. The methodology, use of triangulation strategy, at least 3 measurements for one event. Experts, some kind of interviews, deep interviews, in-depth interviews, in order to get more or less precise information about the processes in Armenia, in Georgia, in between Moscow and these 2 countries of origin. In Moscow, please, the red is not by chance here. There were 3 studies on potentials for out-migration in Armenia, 2 studies in Georgia, and 2 studies also in Moscow, not focused on Armenian and Georgians, but on immigrants from the former Soviet republics. But no one study focused on both sides. Countries donors of international cross-border migration and country receiving this country of cross-border migration. So this was a pioneering work, what we did, using interviews, 200 interviews with returnees who have stayed in Moscow, not generally in Russia, in Moscow, who have returned back to Georgia and Armenia, 200 in each country. 200 interviews with returnees from other directions, in Georgia from Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and so on and so on. Armenians have been all over the world. And 100 interviews with young people who did not have any migration experience, but intended or believed that it could be possible, would be desirable to move out of Armenia and Georgia because of whatever reason, mostly to work abroad, to collect money, to return back or to stay in the home country, different motivations. The background information for our empirical field studies was the information with experts. 17 in Yerevan, 21 in Tbilisi, and 29 in Moscow. We developed a tool, research tool, continuing the same research tool, but it was at the beginning of the work on its elaboration. We used it in the comparative study of interethnic relations in Tatarstan, Crimea, Moldova, Bulgaria, and Berlin, in the blue book over there. But for the study on out-migration from Armenia and Georgia and immigration to Moscow, we elaborated very much on it in Moscow. Interviews with migrants from Armenia who have reached Moscow after 1990, because we knew that there are Armenians who have immigrated to Russia 300 years ago. There were pogroms in Calcutta, for instance, and the local Armenian diaspora moved to Astrakhan and then to Moscow. So only immigrants after 1990. Immigrants from Georgia, 200 also after 1990. Interviews with experts, monitoring of related events. Our need to study related events related with migration was strengthened by the events in South Ossetia, Georgia. We had to know what intervening variables were at the time of our collection of primary information. So I'll skip up this structure of the tool. Maybe better to return back to the kitchen of the preparation of the study and the kitchen of the organization of the identification of the victims of our interviews, the interviewed person. At a given point of time, I was in a critical situation to make a decision. How to identify the people who have returned to Armenia, 5 towns, from Moscow, exactly from Moscow, and from other destinations. Exactly the same story with Georgia. Both countries are small, but nevertheless, how to identify exactly these persons to be motivated to give an interview about their experience in Moscow. The solution came absolutely unexpectedly. The director of the Institute of Philosophy, Sociology, Law, and something else in the small, nice country called Armenia. Oh, there is a solution, he told me. Well, in front of all block of flats in the towns, there are 3, 4, 5, 10 elderly women, always in black, in Armenia, always in black, in Georgia, who know everything, who has been where, who makes love with whom, whose children are, and so on, all the details of everyday life. And it worked perfectly well. Our interviews had to identify first this group of old women having all the necessary information about who has been somewhere, and it worked perfectly well. Not a joke. Very serious issue for people who will do field work further on. This type of information, this type of advice which I received from Georg Pogosyan might be, well, life-saving in professional terms. It was a different story in Moscow. Can you imagine to identify 200 Armenians who have come to Moscow after 1990? Whoops. Easy to say, difficult to do the job. Moscow officially is 11.5 million. Well, and to identify 200 Armenians. I first went to the Institute of Sociology of Russian Academy of Sciences. I have a number of good friends there, and they were unanimous. Mission impossible. Well, but it had to be possible somehow. So I went to a university which does not have high intellectual professional prestige, but has a tremendous number of doctoral students. The doctoral student received the homework. Go there and find one, catch him or her, and interview the person. After the collection of this primary information, we checked the results carefully statistically. And it turned out that from the 200 interviews taken, made with Armenians, maybe statistically, deviations, substantial deviations, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 very low percentage were faked, filled in some way in the cafe by a very busy doctoral student. But, well, we have the same stories of all the polls. So, simple facts, small facts, very important professionally for, so the two not particularly important. So, once more, at that time I did not have elaborate conceptual scheme. Nobody expected far-reaching theoretical analysis, conclusions. More important was to reach information, to some extent at least striking new information. Anyway, my first, the start of my field studies and then interpretation of data, collected data, was absolutely simple, even too simplistic, if I analyze what I have done at that time. Please keep in mind, it was very, very difficult to work with this team, divided by patriotic or nationalistic emotions, and it was not easy task indeed. So anyway, my hypothesis, simplistic hypothesis, read in the following way. Out-migration for Armenia to Moscow, well, shows rather different patterns. I focused on the differences as compared to out-migration from Georgia to Moscow, because the social situations in Armenia and Georgia are rather specific. First of all, Armenia has traditional friendly relationships, very traditional, long in history with Russia, so one may expect different attitudes of Armenians to Russia, to Moscow, different attitude of Muscovites to Armenians, and so on, the local situation in Armenia. In Georgia historically, or the Georgian population has regarded the Russians and occupational forces, to put that, or the vast majority of the population, saw different attitudes, different adaptation in Moscow. And most naturally, after the war, the relationships between Russia and Armenia and Russia and Georgia were at that time rather different. So, ergo, the conclusion, one may expect different patterns of immigration, immigrants, emigration, emigrants from Armenia and Georgia to Moscow. So, at the end of the day, I was very much satisfied to see my hypothesis falsified. You would look at me with this type of eyes. We have 40 doctoral students in my establishment. And all of them try to develop a hypothesis which can be verified, confirmed by the facts. Please keep in mind that a falsified hypothesis might be much less important for science. In any rate, not generally less important. So this was a learning process. It was falsified. But let me go into some details about smaller scale, more focused hypotheses. Very simplistic. Exactly like once Mikhail Kalashnikov has defined it. The simpler, not just the better, the best. Well, it's not always the case, but in some cases it works. The first hypothesis was focused on the weak ties. You know the story with Granovetter, the strength of the weak ties of interpersonal connections, information exchange face-to-face, informal relations. Particularly, Granovetter had an excellent study on the search for job. So, my hypothesis, the Armenians could rely on diaspora, interpersonal, clan relationships, and certainly based on ethnic proximity. Migrants from Georgia cannot rely on the diaspora, so they will have different patterns of integration in working life. So, let me explain what this means. Former migrants from Georgia, this means who have been there and we interviewed them in Georgia. Former migrants from Armenia. Current Armenians and Georgians who we interviewed in Moscow. Can you read it over there? Is it here? It's not focus one. So, who?
It's okay.
Nikolai.
Okay,
It's not focus. I'm sorry for disturbing you, but please try to improve. So, well, as far as possible. Well, you remember the slogan, be realist, try to ask for the impossible. So, you might see that in the 90s, the returnees to Armenia and Georgia have been mostly in Moscow during the 90s. They have relied mostly on friends and relatives. But surprisingly enough, Georgians more than the Armenians. I was struck how it is possible. Strong diaspora of Armenians in Moscow, but the Georgians relied more on friends and relatives. Well, the explanation came one evening around the table. Local Armenian told me, these guys coming after the independence, they have to stay in Armenia to build up independent Armenia. They are traitors. Understand the point? Well, the old diaspora was pressed by the circumstances to move to Moscow. But now the circumstances are favorable for staying in Armenia. Well, very specific way of thinking and receiving the ethnic Armenians by the ethnic minority of Armenians. Some of them don't speak Armenian at all, but have the ethnic identity of being Armenians. So, the situation has changed in the course of time. Well, more or less, step by step, the migration has received institutional backing. This means agencies for providing or offering work or orientation or more civilized way of search for job at the Russian labor market. So the newcomers, after who we met or interviewed in Moscow, could rely on their own efforts to get a job. And you see the reliance on friends and relatives is still high. And everywhere in the world this is the case. But the reliance on the own activities, initiative, has increased substantially in the course of time. So, highly intriguing results of disparities between what experts say, experts in Armenia, Georgia, and in Russia, in Moscow, and what our interviews, which are more reliable, gave as a result. Well, general statement, typical in Armenia, typical in Georgia, typical in Russia. So Armenians are law obedient, Georgians are not, they're deviants. So look around for criminals, they're Georgians, or people at the edge of legal activities and criminal activities. Do I speak too fast? Is it more or less acoustically understandable? Good. So let me see what under these conditions the data told us. It was, the statement of the experts concerning the deviant behavior of Georgia was at least partly correct, but concerning Georgians during the 90s. They were very much involved in other activities. You see the regular, normal activities. Industry, construction, transport, trade, education, healthcare, and other activities might be, a large variety of activities, including non-legal activities. And this was the case. but the information of the experts was outdated. And I fully understand the colleagues, they were sincere, they told us what they knew, but the information they possessed was old. Referring to the 90s, during the period of our interview, 2009 mostly, the situation has changed, as you see, among other activities, both ethnic groups, Armenians and Georgians, and are very, very close. And other activities might be, for instance, waiters. Waiters, for instance. Another story, funny story, but very interesting for us as social scientists, concerned this car. Everywhere from all experts in Yerevan, we received the information that Armenians are very good in construction and they are over-concentrated in construction work. Yes, true, but for the 90s. For Armenians who have already come back to Armenia, and we identified and interviewed them there. But, well, you may see that Armenians and Georgians we identified and interviewed in Moscow have nearly the same percentage involvement in construction work. So, the information of the colleagues in Armenia and also the Russian experts were pretty sure that Armenians are mostly in the construction work. No, this is not the case. You may see that there are Armenians and Georgians absolutely the same percentage in industry and so on, everywhere, transport, trade, well, yeah.
May I ask if this group concerned the growth in Moscow? So you have been or you are. So if this former migrants from Georgia in Moscow is especially about which economy they do employed when they do in Moscow or currently when they are back in Baku?
What they did in Moscow. What they did in Moscow. We had to compare what the present moment at that time, Armenians and Georgians were doing in Moscow and what the previous migrants had done there. So, another story, simple story, but important story. Statement of experts. Well, unfortunately, migrants from Armenia and Georgia in Moscow were in a very disadvantaged position. They do not work in occupational niches which are close or very related to their education. Yes and no. Yes for the previous time. For the previous time, no for the Georgians. Large percentage, very large, 57% of the Georgian migrants in previous times, in the 90s, did not work what they have studied or learned for. But you see the situation has changed. The no's declined and the partly correspondence of what they have learned in their home countries and what they were doing increase substantially partly, and also increase of entire correspondence between what they have learned and what they were doing. And just final slide of this type. Basic attitudes change in the course of time. So you would agree with me. Basic attitudes change in the course of time. But interesting was that the basic attitudes, both Armenians and Georgians, changed in the same time, and you shall see the evidence. Well, very, very simple, but very important actually, because Ukrainian migrants to Spain, Italy, or Poland send remittances to Vinica, Chernivtsi, or Kharkiv area, typical. But in the course of time, less and less so. The decline of the readiness to send money to the friends, relatives, even families. We came across curious situations with Armenians, Georgians having families, children, wives in Armenia and Georgia, but having wives, children in Moscow as well, and very, very rapidly declining readiness to send remittances back to the country. What is interesting, and absolutely the same pace you may see in previous times for the migrants who have been in the 90s mostly in Russia. Yes, definitely. Well, no, small percentage, 20% in the average. Well, for migrants who we have identified in Moscow, most of them have stayed since 1995, end of the 90s. The need to send remittances, money, to friends, relatives, families in Armenia and Georgia has declined substantially. But in the same pace, Well, Armenians and Georgians are very different, and in the same way they are very close in the mentality. Caucasians. And this is highly intriguing for the further interpretations. So, conclusions from the RGMI project, Armenia, Georgia migration. International migration is needed for both sides, donor countries, host countries, and problematic in all moments of the chain between the decision to migrate till the country, host country of migration. And this is my conclusion, which I draw in 2009, end of 2009, after having gone through all the data which we had already collected and preparing a collective monograph which looks like in this way. It was published at the beginning of 2011 in Frankfurt. So, only partial explanations could we develop because we did not have any comprehensive scheme, conceptual scheme. And triangulation was needed even for these partial explanations and so on and so on. Now, I shall move to another project in which our institution is a partner. My dear Nikola, you're privileged always. So well, the leaflets of the project we are just going to complete. It's a project funded by the European Union in the framework of the program Southeastern Europe. But don't think in the traditional terms of Southeastern Europe. Italy and Austria are also involved. It's a strategic project. It includes Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Serbia, Montenegro, Slovenia, Austria, and Italy. 9 countries, 21 institutions from each of these countries. So, typical alternative cases. Italy and Austria profiting from immigration, human capital. You see the increase of the population, due to immigration. Italy has, the nation has a low, very low fertility rate, a Catholic country with very low fertility rate, aging of the population. If there would not have been the immigrants, this is a dying out nation. But due to the immigrants, mostly from Eastern Europe, mostly Romanians, but I mentioned 280,000 from Ukraine. Ukraine as well, a very large number of Moldovans who are actually Romanian, with Romanian passports, and so on and so on. Polish people also to Italy. Bulgaria and Romania are on the other side of the, say, positive-negative axis. Particularly Bulgaria, very, very strongly hit by emigration. The best and brightest go out. So, working on this project, I had to prepare for, so to say, educational purposes, a working paper on cross-border migration, and I was struck with the same story, but as seen from a different point of view. So important phenomenon, so complex phenomenon, and no comprehensive, explanatory, or even conceptual scheme. Striking. There are only partial explanatory efforts. Some of them are written down here. New classical economic theory. On the one side, a poor country with low level of wages and salaries. On the other side of the border, a rich country with high level of wages and salaries. People from the poor country move labor force, move to the richer country, and at a given point of time, there is already lack of labor force, deficit of labor force. In the poor country, salaries and wages have to go up because of the surplus of workforce. In the richer country, salaries and wages go down. Well, ideal picture. The precondition is easy moving through the border and easy getting a job in the rich country. No condition is given. The fence between the United States and South America is very clear symbol of the difficulties to cross borders and unrealistic presumptions of this neoclassical economic theory. New economics of labor migration. Only briefly to present the guiding idea. It comes from field studies in the Philippines and Kenya by French anthropologists. They have discovered that the decision to migrate, cross-border migration is taken, the decision is taken there by collectives. This might be families, large rural families, or even rural community, the whole village, with the intention in good times to disperse the sources of income, in bad times to have additional sources of income for survival. Very nice, grounded theory, absolutely not generalizable. Because it requires rural communities, large families, and so on, and well, something which is not available in industrialized, well-developed country in terms of structure like Ukraine, for instance, not applicable. Or if applicable, in very, very rare cases. Well, collective decisions in individualized countries, they are very rare cases. Dual labor, what's the timing I have?
15, 20 minutes.
20 minutes, perfect. So, dual labor market theory. A labor market in the developed countries divided between high-quality jobs, well-paid jobs requiring high level of education, and low-paid jobs because of the low level of education of people, well, so to say, dirty work, dangerous, dirty work. Yes and no. Yes, there is such division, but it is a continuum. There are in between jobs which require qualifications which the migrants have. And you know that even for the top positions of CEOs, researchers, and so on, the competition on the part of immigrants is very high. 41.7% of the researchers with PhD in the United States were not born in the United States. Typical example of immigrants who have managed to get the highest quality positions. So, and there are all big companies have already their departments, so-called head hunting departments. Well, looking around for the best and brightest, even for the top positions. So, the background idea of this dual labor market theory is immigrants can only fill in the dangerous, dirty jobs, and they will try to move out. So new immigrants would be needed to fill in these positions. Yes, this is realistic, but on the other side, immigrants are more and more interested in positions in the middle and the top as well. So, not realistic anymore. Wood systems theory, very, very rarely, only exceptionally operationalized. Well, there is center, this means United States present day, plus the highly developed countries in Western Europe and North America, Canada is meant. Well, highly sophisticated products, services come from this core of the present day civilization and move to the semi-periphery and periphery. Labor force moves in a different direction. Yes, I agree, there are quite serious ideas behind this, so very simplified way presented ideas. But once more, there are certainly theoretical and difficulties in operationalization to carry out this type of studies because center is very different. Netherlands, Britain, Sweden, United States, Canada, very different labor markets. Some of them strongly individualistic, other social democratic labor markets, regulated labor markets like Sweden, Denmark, or Norway. So there are some inherent theoretical issues and methodological issues. So network theory. I quite agree that network theory might be used because you have seen the migrants rely on the strength of the weak informal ties with friends and relatives, but entirely as explanatory framework cannot be the case. So I studied all these partial explanatory schemes and came to the conclusion, my goodness, there is lack of efforts to fill in a niche in the intellectual development. So, jump in immediately. So, I prepared an article which will appear, well, I hope very much, I have not received the confirmation, in Migration Studies, the international journal. I submitted it in August, so usually it takes time. My conclusion from the previous research and starting point in the article reads so simplified. There is no comprehensive conceptual framework covering the complexities of international cross-border migration. The available frameworks are only partial and based on disciplinary. This means sociology, political sciences, demography, economy, backgrounds, traditions. And this makes them deterministic on one factor, focus on one determining factor. Classical economic theory, well, differences in wages and salary. This is the only background of the explanation. Very strong explanatory factor, but there are many other explanatory factors. I'll give you further on the clue. So, what was my task? To think about the operationalized elements in the situation of push immigrants from the countries of origin. And you may see technological structures. Well, technological division of labor underdeveloped. Technological level generally underdeveloped. Economic structures. Economic balances practically disbalances. Distribution of income unhealthy. Concentration on income and wealth in small groups of, how do you put it in Ukraine, oligarchs? Or something like that. Well, political instabilities. Division of power concentrated in small mafiotic structures, not dispersed in many actors. Efficiency of governance law. Cultural tolerance in the sense of intolerance. Religious identities which are controversial, and so on. Structures, technological, economic, political, and cultural structures. Well, influencing the needs to emigrate in most specific terms. Few or no jobs. I operationalized the pyramid of needs once more, but in more specific terms. Low income in my home country, I have to move to a country with high incomes. Underdeveloped infrastructure, well, streets are in bad shape. I have a launcher and the streets in my home country are not good for launcher. So I have to take my launcher and go to Germany. Well, to simplify the issue. Low quality of healthcare. In Romania, I mentioned in a talk, in a previous talk, Romanians experience a dramatic situation. Whole regions have remained without medical doctors anymore. They have moved to Germany, Britain, Italy, Norway, Sweden. Well, they are pretty good in their education and very good in practice. Very good in practice. A German doctor, a medical doctor, relies on technology. A Romanian or Bulgarian doctor relies on the experience and much faster and more consistent. Well, he might be also wrong, like everybody in the world, but it takes time and quite a lot of funding for, say, the functioning of medical system in Germany or Great Britain or Sweden. So these competent, practically very competent doctors are welcome. Well, Germany has opened the doors for medical doctors from Eastern Europe. They recognize the diplomas, they only, retraining with the technology which is used in Germany is being carried out. So political instability and so on, the push factors here operationalized. Well, you know that in the pyramid of needs of Maslow, on the top, so to say, the last determining factors, communication with the almighty of some spiritual forces. I put the children on the top. The future of the children as a moving force. So, the chain between the two geographical poles, destination and country of origin. Well, very, very serious issue. Legal approaches, non-legal approaches to moving from the country of origin to the country of destination. At all moments, the first barrier, the departure. Well, you have to cross the border somehow of your own country. Well, and cross the border of the future home country, in between transportation, which may be smuggling and trafficking, many illegal ways. Recently there was a scandal in Germany. A group of 5 Vietnamese was discovered in a car moving beton, concrete. And they were on acrobatic ways over the beton, concrete, cement. Well, instead, this is existentially dangerous. It was a scandal. Coming from Poland, this means they have crossed the Russian, Ukrainian, Polish border to be discovered in Germany. Well, this is an industry, extremely profitable industry. To move one person from Vietnam to France, this is the country of destination of Vietnamese people, because of the 400,000 Vietnamese from the times of the colonial rule of France Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So, this is the movement in between, and the pull factors, the whole country. Well, good future for the children and jobs available. Everything with question mark. It might be the case, might be not. Currently in Italy, it's extremely difficult to get a job for an immigrant. The good years are over. Spain had a booming economy till the crisis, 2008, 2009. Well, most immigrants stay who were legalized. Spain made 2 very generous legalization of immigrants, but for newcomers, this is not a country good for fast accommodation as it was the case. And this is the whole conceptual scheme. In my article, I tried to distinguish specific explanatory modes at the different point of the move from the country of origin and influencing the country of origin on stage. I also tried to think about how the links with the home country are kept alive, what moves the return migration, and so on and so on. So, what's the scientific added value? Indicators, first of all, for a comprehensive description, explanation of the preparation, implementation, effects of cross-border migration. because many factors, many intervening variables are involved in the process, no monolinear explanation could have sound ground. Only multiple, only probabilistic determination can be really used as explanatory orientation. Causes and effects, both countries should be studied. It's a costly endeavor, but it's the only promising way in the countries of origin and in the home countries. What is the practical added value of this strategy? Well, keep in mind the variety of factors influencing migration, cross-border migration, push and pull factors. So the policies of regulating and managing cross-border migration should be always multidimensional in order to be efficient, to have to take in account both the situation in the donor country and in the country receiving. Very good example in this respect, special negotiations, decisions on the part of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to establish support for the families, children of migrants from Moldova to Italy. Very good practical experience. But all in all, 700 children of migrants from Moldova to Italy are being supported. Well, children who have abandoned practically by migrants from the small country Moldova, well, dispersed all over Western Europe, well accounted, well, this is an estimation, between 350,000 and 400,000. You see, good ideas, very good wishes, practical stories of different kinds. Oh. We are all surprised. So.
Огромное спасибо профессору Генову за блестящую лекцию, такую большую картину миграции, как исследовать миграцию, причем от теории, методологии до результатов. Это действительно